Thank you so much. So I also just want to echo our thanks to the Diocese of Olympia, the 20s and 30s ministry, who has just, I want to say especially to thank you to Valerie Renke, who has worked so hard with me to help this thing, especially her, to make this event. So let's just give a quick thank you. And also all the yummy treats in the back. So let's have even louder gratefulness for that. So, and there's some folks from the 20s and 30s ministry who really helped put this program together as well. So I'm so grateful for them. So many of us know about Taizé music, right? Like we know, you probably tonight was not the first time you heard of this idea of Taizé. And when we say we sort of go to Taizé in the United States, generally speaking, we mean that we're going to a prayer service, or we think of it as a prayer service, during which we sing that beautiful Taizé music. This music comes from a particular village in France whose name is Taizé. And it comes from a community located in that village where an ecumenical monastery emerged during and after World War II to pray for peace in hopes that World War would never happen again, and to just be, deep in prayer. And they began a journey of inviting all of us to greater peace of heart and the deeper possibilities of a richer inner life combined with human solidarity. This was something that Brother Emile spoke about in his workshop this morning, and it was so moving to me, this idea of a deep inner life combined with human solidarity. And the human solidarity is both as an ecumenical movement, drawing us all together as people who deeply love Jesus, and also with the poor and marginalized. Taizé is the only ecumenical monastery in the world which has been officially authorized or sanctioned by both the Roman Catholic Church and our own tradition, the Anglicans, the worldwide Anglicans. And they are an incredibly diverse community. They have many languages and many cultures that come from and many denominations that come from all over the world. In fact, each summer, every week, between 2,000 and 4,000 people come there to worship together, 90% of them under age 30, in a church whose walls had to be broken down to make bigger so that more people could join, because it became too large. The visitors became too large. I've been so privileged in my life to be able to visit the community of Taizé twice. Once when I was living overseas. For those of you who remember, I taught English in a Spanish high school over there. And I had the distinct pleasure of meeting Brother Emile. I had been singing Taizé weekly at St. James Cathedral in Seattle. They used to have every Friday service, and 2 or 3 times a year here at Epiphany. But I was unprepared for the joy and transformation that came from my visit to France. I made friends from Finland and Germany and England and Spain and the Basque Country. I met people from Indonesia, and it was amazing. China. We worshiped 3 times a day, hearing scripture in at least 5 different languages. But by the end of the week, I want to tell you, I didn't hear the differences in the language anymore. The scripture was being read 5 times over in all these different languages, and it felt like I was just hearing the scripture 5 times. It was remarkable. It helped you realize that these artificial divisions between us, language isn't that artificial, but it is a division between us, and it helps you realize that those walls between us can shrink, they can fall, and you really can be one together. Anyway, it was amazing. So I sang my heart out. I left transformed. That transformation has continued in my soul, and it has been sustained. And I think part of this is due to something else that Brother Emile said this morning in his workshop. And I feel it now, and perhaps you do too, that in the regular chanting of these simple words that often express something about relationship or connectedness with God, we are helped to release whatever anxiety is within us, whatever nervous fatigue is there, and we are able to transition our super busy minds to a peaceful place. The pace and focus of our brain is so slowed and soothed by the beauty, and it starts to mean something in our hearts. It helps us to enter more fully into a life of inner peace. It's prayer that leads us to simple trust in God, from worry to trust. And I want to say this transition from worry or anxiety or fear to trust is the main gift that the community of Taizé has offered the world. And thank God that you did, and thank God that we have it. So I'm so privileged to be speaking tonight with Brother Emile. I'm going to have some questions that came from the 20s, 30s ministry, and then you guys get to ask your questions. Brother Emile was born in Canada and joined the community of Taizé in 1976, which doesn't seem possible because how young you look, but that's okay. At Taizé, he frequently leads Bible studies and workshops and teaches theology in the Taizé community. He's written on the otherness of God, the Eucharist, and the early Christians, on Paul's letter to the Colossians. So, Brother Emile, we are so honored by your presence, and we are so excited to hear news from Taizé and to learn more from you tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the warm welcome. I must say that I'm not used to doing a service with such high quality music. It was our challenge at Taizé is more to deal with thousands of people who don't speak a common language, and we create a choir every week because people are there for a week from Sunday to Sunday, and sometimes they're good musicians. But the brothers, we do what we can to pray together. Some have knowledge of music, others don't know how to sing. They try to sing, but our main aim is to try to make the prayer accessible. And that's one of the remarkable things, I think. Just now, at the end of October, just a few days ago, there were 6,000 young French people at Taizé because the high school students get 2 weeks holidays at the end of October. It used to be for All Saints. And now it's a more secular explanation to the holidays, and we get these students that come from all over France. There were 1,000 from a single diocese near Paris that came all together. Sometimes it's a chaplaincy. So in French, you have these, they're called aumôneries, we translate chaplaincy. Maybe the core group, it might be 6 or 10 or 12, but because they're going to Taizé, it suddenly becomes 40 or 50, and many are not experienced, have no experience of prayer, of living their faith personally. But they go because their friends have talked to them about Taizé. And then sometimes I stand in the church after the service. The brothers are in white. You can easily see them. We stand all around the church. And those who wish can come to speak more personally with a brother. And so one of my favorite times of the year is the end of October, when these young French people, a little bit younger than the normal age at Taizé, they're 16 to 18 often. The people who come to Taizé in the summer are maybe between 18 and 35, a majority. But 16 to 18 is the beginning of something for many, many young people. And I meet them 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later. And they say, it's when I was 16 that it started. No, I decided I would go pray. I would decide it. And there's a lot of surprise for their friends accompanying them saying, but I know this person doesn't pray. I know this person doesn't go to church. And I see him in the church 1 hour after the prayer is over. He's still there. And so it's very mysterious for, not only for their friends, but it's mysterious for us also, the brothers, that the line dividing people, separating people, believers and non-believers, it's not this massive wall, no? Sometimes it's a very fine line, and it takes very little sometimes to awaken in others the desire for God. The desire for God. And of course beauty does that. No? Beauty does that, the beauty of song. That's why song plays such an important role at Taizé. And I think tonight what we experience together, it also awakens in all of us, the desire for God. We know that we know very little about God, but our desire to know more is awakened. At the same time, we live in a culture that is frightened, that fears. There's a lot of fear about religion. What will religion make of me if I become a religious person? What kind of person will I become? There's some fear of that, fear of losing one's freedom. And beauty removes that fear, I think, because we are all attracted to beauty. Once I thought of the expression, a non-threatening transcendence. A non-threatening. So the transcendent, the mystery of God, the otherness of God, through beauty it's made non-threatening. It awakens our desire. And that's what we wish to do at Taizé by welcoming young adults almost throughout the year for weekly gatherings. And we open our prayer, the prayer of the brothers. We are a total of 90 or so brothers, 60 live at Taizé. we open our prayer and share it with them very simply. We try to read the scriptures with them. We try to see how following Christ involves what Diana said, prayer and inner life, but also solidarity with those in situations that are painful, and it's nothing very complicated, really. No, it's nothing we have created or invented, but people, a trust has grown, I think, between young people and the community over the years that explains why they continue to come. So many things have changed since the beginning of these gatherings. 1966, the first groups came. You can imagine the cultural changes now that youth have been through since 66. It's a different world, really. But they continue to come. They continue to come in very large numbers, and it surprises us. It surprises us. But maybe it's better if I ask you, if you ask me questions that I can try to answer.
Yeah, I think let's just keep going with this thread about what it's like in the community. So there, you talked about the brothers that live in the community, but you also have satellites around the world. And if you could talk about them and how many different languages you speak among you, and how many different branches of Christianity are represented among you.
We are not a very big community. We are, as I said, 90. We have 60 brothers at Taizé, and there are 6 small groups in different parts of the world. Brazil, they've been nearly 50 years there, or even, more than 50 years now, in the state of Bahia, so quite far northeast. Very poor population. None of the prosperity that Brazil experienced reached these people. There's a very violent area. Children are often killed, gun violence. The brothers are there living a life of prayer and of friendship, and they have a garden, a large garden where children can play, live the life of children. They have to leave their gun at the entrance. They're not allowed to come in with a weapon. And they learn how to play again, but they're often used to carry drugs because they won't be put in prison if they're caught, and sometimes they're not responsible with the money they receive for selling drugs, and so they are killed. They're killed, and so that night you hear the shots, and the brothers find out the next day that this child was killed, and so it's a very difficult life, but it's also Brazil, so there's also this resilience that people have, and the brothers have been there a long time. South America has always been important for the community. In the early 60s, the brothers started to travel there and started to live there. In the mid-60s, they lived there. And on other continents, there's Senegal, Africa, a small presence in a Muslim-Christian neighborhood, trying to develop relationships of trust between Muslims and Christians, which is not so difficult to do in Senegal. And there is a small group in South Korea, I forgot to say, in Asia, in Seoul. They've been there 40-some years now. One brother is British, and he's known as a translator. He translates Korean literature, Korean poetry. He's an Oxford person with all the right credentials to translate. And Brother Anthony. And another brother is the exact opposite. He has learned the Korean that people speak in prisons. He visits prisoners, and so he speaks the low-level Korean. And so they're living together, these two brothers, and one Korean brother has joined them. A new brother has just joined them as well, who's learning Korean, not such an easy language to learn. We have brothers more recently, for just the last 3 or 4 years, in Cuba. And it's a country where almost everyone would like to leave. You were in a room like this, you would say, who would like to leave the country? And everyone raises their hand. They all want to leave. So it means something to them that some people have chosen to go live in their country. We have an Indonesian brother who is there, an African brother from Benin. One other brother will go soon. So it's a small presence. You have to be very patient. Indonesian brother is very wise. He says, never make a shopping list. When you go out shopping, never make a shopping. You just come back angry and disappointed. Go see what's available and then make a plan for the meal. No? Go see what you can find. And and a small group has also started in a suburb of Paris. Saint-Denis. Saint-Denis has the reputation of being sometimes difficult suburb, and one of the bishops of the area, the Bishop of Saint Denis, asked if the brothers could come and live there. So we've been there for 3 or 4 years as well. So we're not very many. We're these six small groups. In the States, we don't have a group. In the US, North America, we just have visits from brothers once in a while. I get to meet all the North Americans who come to Taizé. And so every week we meet by country, and we reflect with people, what would you like to continue after your week at Taizé? We are not a movement. We don't have members. We don't ask people to be members of Taizé. Our message is always go back to your local church, go back to your local communities. But we like to reflect with people when they're at Taizé, what they would like to continue. We wouldn't want the week to be a flash in the pan, no? And they forget everything. But make them realize that community can exist at home. A prayer can exist in their local church. And we hope that they will find churches that will welcome them, that will welcome their desire to continue. I see a question there. Yes. Yes.
I went to University of Wisconsin, and I lived in a Taizé community
Yes.
called Wayland House.
Okay.
Where we had prayers and dinner, and the brothers would visit us.
Yes, right.
How many of those communities are there?
Well, Taizé communities are just the ones I mentioned. No, people using Taizé songs. We don't know how many people use Taizé songs in churches. We've lost count now. There's so many groups that started all over the place. So, and we don't always know what people do with the name of Taizé. No, so I learn a lot about Taizé when I travel in the U.S. And so people are, we ask them not to call it a Taizé thing because it becomes difficult to distinguish between what the brothers do, the initiatives the brothers take, and so we say maybe call it prayer with Taizé songs, or just to make a slight distinction. It doesn't, we're not always winning that battle, but...
This was started by one of the brothers and our chaplain.
So you're talking about what years? 1960s, 1950s?
1970s to 80s.
No, we never had a group in Wisconsin. We had a group in New York State, in New York, Hell's Kitchen, New York, from 77 to the late 90s. And prior to that, we had a group in Chicago. So there's the south side and the west side of Chicago in the 60s, very early, mid-60s. In the civil rights movement, they were there. From Chicago, they went back to Taizé. One of the brothers went to start the group in Bangladesh. Another brother went to Bangladesh as well, who taught both in the Anglican seminary and in the Catholic seminary, taught scripture. And then we went to Hell's Kitchen. And since then we've been traveling, so once a year, maybe for a month, with prayers. I just came now from San Francisco. There was a weekend with young adults in San Francisco, and before that I was in New York and Washington, D.C., and Princeton. So there are groups that have been to Taizé throughout the year, and they say, well, come and we'll get together with others. And of course the challenge is, how do you share the experience with others? And when you say the word prayer today, not everyone thinks, what an exciting thing. No. You say to young adults today, prayer 3 times a day, really? No. And we have family groups at Taizé also, people who come with young children for a week. There's a special program with theater production, so that the children really, even without speaking a common language, can really enjoy themselves. And so they are, the children, the small children, they are the ones waking up their parents to say, we're going to be late for church. No, we're going to be late. Come. And it's amazing how children can develop a taste for prayer. And maybe the church also is more child-friendly. Could I say it like that? No, there are no pews, so children... Most of the people sit on the floor. We do have a few chairs and benches here and there, so we realize that not everyone can sit on the floor. No, but when a child stands, or even a small child, and the parents are sitting on the floor, the child is taller than his parents, no, or her parents, no? And so it's a very different dynamic, no, when you're in that type of atmosphere. And so the children, at a very young age, develop this desire to pray, and to sing, and to continue singing. And so it continues in their families. Before a meal, they will sing a song, or before going to bed, the parents will go up and sing with them a song or two. And it has changed the lives of many children.
May I just say, I was there with my family in 1995, and I'm so glad to hear you've continued the family program somebody had said, oh, I think it's only for young people. And the experience, my son was 7 and my daughter was 11, and it was meeting children from all over the world. We were the only ones from North America that week, and it was a wonderful experience.
So that continues, and there's another group, in addition to the family group, there is a group for people over 35. So we are what we call, we gather those who are 16 to 18 together, then 18 to 25 at least, and then it's often the 25 to 35 are together, and those over 35 can be 200-300 every week. Every week, so this is what we call the adult group. And so it's. I used to think that when speaking to the adult group for the Bible introductions, I used to think, oh, we have to raise the level, no, because adults know more than young people about Scripture, about Christianity, but it's no longer the case. It's no longer the case. You get lots of adults who are so happy when they start to understand something of the Bible, something of Scripture, something of Christianity. And you have in the same room, you have doctors in theology, and you have to speak to both without being boring. It's quite a challenge. No, it's quite a challenge. But simplicity is not for beginners. That's very important to know that. Simplicity is not for beginners. No? And trust is not for the naive. Trust also is for people with critical minds. Hope is for people with critical minds. No? And simplicity can be maybe the highest act of intelligence. No? Being like a child, Jesus says. No, maybe that's the highest expression of intelligence.
I just want to say the Bible introductions at Taizé are quite remarkable, and I hope that you get to experience them sometime. So I want to shift gears a little bit and think about one of the questions we had from one of the folks in the 20s, 30s ministry was that there is so much misery in the world right now, and what we wondered was how your beliefs and faith equip you to kind of move through this suffering world. And I love this phrase that one of the folks said, what is your infrastructure for understanding and living fully in the face of it all? What helps you thrive?
We live at a difficult time right now. No? There's so much anxiety and fear with the war in Ukraine, the war now in Israel, Palestine. It's a very difficult time. And some of the brothers living in slums in Brazil or elsewhere, they often said children are what help us continue. The children are those who help us, really. They say we could not have persevered all these years if it were not for the presence of these children. Of course, the prayer helps, but you can also be shaken, even if you're a Christian and a believer. It doesn't mean that you are invulnerable, to the surroundings. And on the contrary, I think faith it enlarges our compassion, our empathy. It doesn't diminish it. We don't have these explanations that suddenly take away our questions. So I don't know the answer to that question. The infrastructure, I think, fidelity maybe to prayer means that you can be shaken, but you don't give up. No? I think Paul speaks a little bit like that in one of his letters. No? We don't give up, but it doesn't mean we are without questions. It doesn't mean that we don't feel the pain of others and our own pain. And this prayer that we have on Fridays at Taizé is a prayer around the icon of the cross. It was started many years ago at the request of Russians, when many of our Russian friends were imprisoned and tortured. It was the end, really, of just before Gorbachev, it was a very difficult period. And so, the methods of torture have become very sophisticated also. So there was almost need to develop a new definition of a martyr, because with the injections of chemicals, you can almost make someone say anything. No? And so you can say, I no longer believe. You can lose your mind. And so they said, some of them said, could you remember us on Friday evenings? And so Brother Roger, our founder, who started the community in 1940, said we have to respond to this request from these young Christians who are going through such a difficult time. So we took the large icon of the cross that you saw today next to the lectern. It's my brother painted that cross in the 60s. And we lay it flat in the church on Friday nights at the end of the prayer, and we invite those who wish to come forward and just to put their forehead on the wood of the cross, and as a way of handing over to Christ the burdens that we carry, the burdens that we know about in the world. And when there are thousands of people, so at Taizé it's rarely more than 3,000 or 4,000, very rarely do we have more than that in 1 week. But in the large European meetings that we have after Christmas, there can be 20,000, 30,000 people that stay for 4 days. And so you see this long, long lineup to go to the cross, no? And some people forget about time, they're kneeling in front of the cross and they don't realize there are 3,000, 5,000 people. But they take the time they need to pray in front of the cross. And it's a way, or sometimes we need a non-verbal prayer. Sometimes we need a prayer that is expressed by the body. And so that cross, I think, helps. We wonder sometimes, what did Jesus do? No, he, in his everyday ministry, he came across suffering, he came across pain. Some texts like Luke 7, when he's at Nain, it talks about his intense compassion. No, the verb is very strong in Greek. It was something that touched his entrails, his guts. No, there was a verb has to do with something that he feels for the widow who has now lost her only son. No, so he was not involved. But at the end of the day, what did Jesus do? Probably he handed everything over to his Father. He did everything he could in 1 day. And then the rest he had to hand over. Some things we cannot carry and solve and resolve. But we do what we can, and then we hand over and try to resist discouragement. No? And we resist discouragement far better if we're not alone. If we're not, and that's one of the things I often say to the people I meet at the end of the week at Taizé. To persevere, you will need community. You will need community, and don't try to continue alone. Look for places that are not perfect. No community is perfect. No church is perfect. No parish is perfect. But there's something that is given when we are together.
So beautiful. I totally agree. How important community is, I mean. So I remember that you were very involved in setting up a meeting in the Holy Land for young people in the Holy Land. And of course, many of us at Epiphany have been there. We have a big tradition of pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But everyone, I think, is heartbroken over what is happening there. And so we just wonder what you learned about the Holy Land in your time there, and sort of, I don't know what hope you have for the future there. It feels so crazy to say hope right now in the face of the horribleness that's happening, but I think there is hope, and I wonder if you have thoughts about what you learned there and what hope you have for the future.
Yeah, there was an invitation a few years ago to be more present in the Holy Land. It came from the Tantour Ecumenical Institute that is based in Jerusalem. It's an institute that is at the extreme south of Jerusalem. It practically touches Bethlehem. You just walk down the hill and you cross the checkpoint, the wall, and you're in Bethlehem. So 5-minute walk, you're in Bethlehem. And the request was to be more present, on the one hand, to help with the prayer life of the Institute. People are there for a few months. Some people are there for longer. They're writing their doctorate. There are Notre Dame students. It's also a campus for the University of Notre Dame. And there was a more general invitation, see what you can do in the Holy Land. And you can use Tantu as a base. And so I started going twice a year for a month in 2017. And then in 2018 I did a kind of weekend for young leaders, Palestinian Christian leaders. We tried to sing in Arabic. 30 young leaders came. It was not a failure. It was not a success. It was what it was. No? And I said goodbye to them, not really knowing what would happen. But then the following year we had a Taizé meeting in Beirut, and the Palestinians were able to come to Beirut. The same 30 came. They were the leaders of the youth movement, and then when they saw 1,500 young people from the Arabic-speaking world all singing the songs in Arabic and in the better translations than I was using, they said, now we understand. Now we understand. And they said, so I said, would you what would you think about doing something similar in the Holy Land with the limitations that we have, because we're going to Israel, Palestine. We will not be able to have all the people we would like to have from other Arab countries. And so we set out to do it in 2021, and pandemic came. We pushed it back to May 2022, and so I ended up spending about 6 months preparing. And I realized that Christians in Palestine and Israel were busier than you are in the United States. I was already struck by how busy Americans are, but Palestinians are even more busy because they have all these complications crossing the wall, don't know if they're going to get a permit, they have to renew the permit. And so I realized that our preparation was not going to work really. No, we would do things by Zoom to solve logistical problems, and it's not what I wanted. No, it's not. Our theme was hope. Our theme was hope. And so I came back to Taizé in the fall of 21, and I started to think, let's try to organize 40 evenings in different parts of the country where we will just pray and talk about hope together. And so I found 40 different places, communities that were willing to do that. And we didn't talk about logistics. There were no talk about logistics, just trying to pray together. And I felt how happy the Palestinians in particular were to speak about hope. It was and when times are difficult, you either lose your faith or you go deeper in your faith. No? You either lose all hope or you go deeper in hope. And it's possible to be so intimidated by the complexity of the situation there. No one has answers for it. No one has easy answers, that you could refrain from doing anything. No? But I felt if we can at least sustain a tiny bit, no? This movement towards sources of hope through prayer, through community, when there's a day when it will be possible to sit around a table to discuss solutions, if there are still people who have hope, it will make things much easier. No? And so we did that, and then in May 22 we had the gathering. All the churches said yes, all the Greek Orthodox Church, the Latin Catholic Church, the Syriac Catholic Church, the Greek Catholic Church, the Anglicans did a very good job in supporting the meeting, the Lutherans. And so it was unusual for the churches to say yes to something in common, but they all liked it. They all liked it. So, yes, naturally you can imagine that the recent events, there were many messages coming from all sides, from Jewish friends, from Palestinian friends. Yesterday my phone rang and there was a Palestinian family that lives at Taizé that we welcomed. They never lived in Palestine. They say they're Palestinian, but they were born in Damascus. Their parents were refugees. Their parents had to leave, and they were born in Damascus and did a good life, had a good life in Damascus. They were teachers, and then when the civil war broke out in Syria, they had to flee. They went to Lebanon, and life was difficult in Lebanon. So we heard about their difficulties, and someone said, would you take them at Taizé? And so we welcomed them at Taizé, and they wanted to talk to me yesterday. They phoned, and the woman's family is in Gaza. And so she's an elderly woman, and so she was thinking about her family, and it's hard to get news. She says she gets news once in a while, but not every day. So I've been thinking a lot about them, and the Latin patriarch wrote a very good text on the situation. The patriarch Pizzaballa, who recently made a cardinal, and Bishop Hussam, also the Anglican bishop, very close to all the churches. He was the spokesperson for the churches before being the Archbishop of Jerusalem. And so we pray for all those who are suffering. No, all those who are suffering, all the children of God. And the patriarch said that very clearly in his letter, Patriarch Pizzaballa. We pray for everyone, and we have to do more in all areas. No? He condemned very clearly what happened on the 7th of October, the massacre of so many innocent Jewish people, and he said also that he realized that we have to do more as Christians to support the Palestinians and the rights of Palestinians. And so it was a text, I think, that touched the Palestinians as well. It touched the Jewish people, but it touched also the Palestinians, that we have to do more as well. So I don't know. Hope, you're right. Hope is a word that is not easy to use right now. And that's why I think we are praying mostly. We are praying mostly for all these people. And I wrote to all my friends. One American writer who lives in Bethlehem was a little bit surprised that I had not contacted her in the days that followed the attack. And she said, you realize you should write to all your friends immediately. Take 2 hours, drop everything you're doing. Take 2 hours. And so I took 2 hours and I wrote to 60 or 70 people I know, and Jewish and Palestinian, and almost all of them replied within the hour or within the day, saying how important it is for them to know that we are praying for them.
So I guess I'm writing a letter to Ayad tomorrow. So he's our guide in Jerusalem. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So I think that now we want to switch to something a little bit lighter. So one of the young people especially wanted to know, what is it like to be a monk? And what's the hardest thing, and what brings you the most joy?
Thanks for saying monk. Yeah, thanks. The Polish sometimes come to Taizé, don't always speak good English, so they ask me how many monkeys were at Taizé. And then I don't know the answer to that one. So Brother Roger didn't really use the word monk, but he said Taizé has a monastic essence. Taizé has a monastic essence. And so when we use the word monk, sometimes people think, of medieval times and medieval buildings. And so we're not monks in that way. But in the word monastic, there is the word monos. No? Monos, one. One, no? We use that word in many ways, mono. And Brother Roger liked the idea that Augustine already developed in the 4th century, that we live together as brothers in order to be of one heart and one mind, as the Acts of the Apostles speaks of the early Christian community, of one heart and one mind. So that's an ideal. It doesn't mean it always works, but that's the ideal, and you try to walk towards that objective every day. You try to walk towards it. Doesn't mean being the same. Doesn't mean being the same. There's wonderful diversity in the community, and there's a wonderful diversity in the Christian family. That's a good thing. But not to use that diversity as a pretext to be separate and to be apart and to be in opposition to one another. Brother Roger thought of monasticism not as something that should be restored. He didn't wish to restore something of the past, but he wished to draw from the wisdom of the great founders like St. Benedict and the early monks in the desert of Egypt and Palestine, but to create something for today. Now, he was very aware that we live in a world that has changed, and so he wanted to use that wisdom of the fathers to create something for today. And so that means being free to renew the vocabulary sometimes that is used, to renew even a certain style of life. In the Rule of Taizé, which he wrote in 1952-53, it was published in 53, there's a sentence that I've always liked regarding families. Often monks, women or men, when they would leave to a monastery, they would leave their family in a kind of almost definitive way, and you would have to visit once in a while behind bars almost. And Brother Roger had this sentence, show your family deep affection. It's the sign of the absolute of your vocation. And so it's a lovely expression. The quality of your love for your own family is a sign of your vocation. It's not in opposition to your vocation. He didn't use the word poverty because he felt that it was a word that could not be understood so well today. So he spoke of simplicity of life, of sharing. He didn't use the word obedience, though the word certainly has a meaning for today as well, but he felt it would be misunderstood. So he spoke about a commitment to live as a community and accept the decisions that are made in community, something bigger than your own mind, but not turning off your mind, but opening up to something larger. And so the community started in that way, really, a desire to live a common creation was the expression Brother Roger used, une création commune, to be creative together. So you have all this variety of gifts, and to be creative together. Community doesn't just happen. Community is intentional. It demands a certain watchfulness, a certain vigilance. It's nourished by prayer, but it's also necessary to always be seekers, to to keep alive that sense that we are called. And so Brother Roger wrote a book that was quite influential in the 60s. In French it was called, in the 70s, mid-60s. It sounds terrible in English, but I'll tell you the French title. Dynamique du provisoire. Dynamique du provisoire. So dynamic of the provisional. So there are many situations for which we have no definitive answers. But he felt that sin would be immobility, to do nothing because we don't have the definitive answers. So we have to have provisional, temporary answers sometimes until we find better responses. So how to be together as Christians? We don't know the answer to all the theological problems, but to be immobile would be a pretext, would be an alibi, would be so let's find temporary solutions that allow us to be together as much as possible. And so the community lives very much in that spirit. Sometimes I think people would associate monasticism to stability. It's one of the even commitments that the Benedictines make. The dynamic of the provisional seems to be a little bit opposed to that, but it's not really. No, the stability comes from the life commitments that we make as brothers. We make vows, but around that fire of the life the commitments are, there is a dance. There is a dance of where there can be room for creativity, for this dynamic of the provisional. It's a big question. What does it mean to be a monk? So I don't know. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, maybe what is it like to be? What's the day in the life like?
Well, a day in the life is kind of boring to describe because we pray 3 times a day, but the week is going to be different at Taizé. Every week's going to be different. You'll have 1,000 Germans one week and 300 Portuguese another week, and so we have to adapt constantly to the people who are there. When it's quiet, it will be quiet. Just about now is the quiet time that's starting, and it will be quiet until early December. People will come from northern Spain in December. They have a few days holidays. Then we have the big European meeting that we've been having now for 44 years, 44 consecutive years, except for the 2 years of the pandemic. We'll be in Slovenia this year, in Ljubljana, the capital. So these meetings are, we call them meetings in French. It's a richer word, rencontre. Rencontre is a gathering, an encounter, you would almost say in English, but the aim is that to give an experience of church to the young adults who come. And there's no better experience of church than being welcomed in a family, being welcomed in a church. The experience of hospitality helps people understand what the church is all about. And, when you realize we are brothers and sisters, we don't know each other, but after a few minutes we are already part of the same family. And so we have noticed the power that this has. So we ask, when there were 100,000 people in Paris in 94 or 106,000 people in Vienna, we asked families to open up their doors. And so families would take 4, 5, 6 people. So in Poland, in some countries like Poland, the welcome is very generous. So sometimes parents leave their bedroom, they sleep under the kitchen table, they let their bedrooms to very generous. And so when you experience that, you start to wonder what makes that possible. What allows for that? What creates that availability of the heart to welcome, and people start to understand something about faith. I can tell you just one story in Paris. There was a young woman who came from a part of Bosnia that speaks Hungarian, and she did not really come to Paris for prayer or for the Taizé meeting. She came because it wasn't expensive to come for the Taizé meeting, and she could do some tourism. So she arrives in Paris, and she's told that she's going to live with 6 other people in a house in a suburb of Paris, a very nice house. The owner is there, welcomes them, shows them the house, the fridge, gives them the keys and says, sorry, I cannot be here this week. I have to go, but you have the house. And she said, in my country, we would not give our keys to our most trusted neighbor. And that's how she became a Christian. That's how she became a Christian. Someone was not afraid to trust in me. And so these are things that you experience. No, they're not things you can explain, but and then of course there's, at the heart of these meetings, there's the prayer and all of that. But yeah, I'll let you continue.
Well, I want to say that one of the things that's always struck me is that the Taizé brothers don't take gifts. And so everybody has to work every day. right?
So that was a choice we made in the 40s. Brother Roger's father was not very pleased with his son's decision to start a community. Brother Roger was tempted. He wanted to be a writer until the age of 24. Maybe he was thinking more of being a writer. He wrote a very, you heard the text tonight that we read. It was it's translated, but the French is very beautiful, and it helped to have a writer. It helped to have it because the feelings of the heart, of the soul, they require a lot of finesse sometimes to be expressed. And Brother Roger had that. He loved the music of Johann Sebastian Bach because it's a music where there's the counterpoint, where there is and the contradictions that are in us also. That's never as simple as people say to be a believer. And so he was a writer, but his father did not encourage him to become a writer, because there was an uncle who was a writer who ended up living a very poor life in Paris, and so he accepted reluctantly to study theology. He didn't really want to be a pastor, but then he discovered this call to found a community, and his father said, "Oh, you will depend on people with money. You will lose your freedom." And Brother Roger said, "Never. We will earn our life. We will earn our life." So the brothers started a farm, then they started a pottery, and they started a publishing house, and the brothers could be independent financially. And that's continued to this day. And for the weekly meetings that take place at Taizé, people share in the costs of what it would take to. We try to keep things very, very simple. So maybe $10, $12 a day for a young American. That includes food and accommodation. Double that amount, at least double for an adult who is working from the Western world. But if you come from another part of the world, maybe it's half of that or a quarter of that. And so the solidarity between countries, it makes it possible to welcome many, many people and not be in debt too often. No? And so we had a little bit difficulty, of course, during COVID, because we had to shut down completely. And there exceptionally we asked for help from our friends, not for the community, but for the weekly meetings and the buildings that we had to still pay taxes on, and we still had to heat sometimes, a minimum at least in the winter. But we survived. And so the simplicity of life that comes from earning your own living is also good for a community, because you're more rooted in reality. You understand the challenges of others. And as I said earlier about simplicity, there are many good things that come from simplicity. No? And also a welcoming others into your home with simplicity. Brother Roger always felt that is important. No? That people can be intimidated easily when we all enjoy being welcomed in a good way and a nice way and a good meal. But when there's simplicity, there's also it's maybe easier to form community. So we live that way. And then we have a thing called Operation Hope that started many years ago, where we do accept donations for particular projects that we have in the world, like could be to support what's going on in Bangladesh or in Senegal or in Cuba or in different parts of the world. Now with refugees, we're welcoming quite a number of asylum seekers and refugees. So we do have this Operation Hope where people can contribute.
I tried to buy Nutella for them, and they said no, so I gave it to the volunteers when I was visiting. So it's getting late, but I want to make sure other people have a chance to ask any questions. So what other questions do you have, if any? It's definitely getting late.
I don't really have a question, but we actually worship at a different church in town. But I remember you from visiting Taizé when I was 19 in 1988, I believe. I spent a week there early in the summer, and then I came back and I spent 2 weeks in Taizé. So I'm immunocompromised, and my doctor says I have to keep my mask on. It's great. But the second time I visited, the second week I spent in silence. And I wondered if you could just spend a couple of minutes talking about that to people. It was a very profound experience at that age, and then I lived in many countries, ended up obviously at the other side of the world from my accent. But it's something that I have retained very deeply inside me when I think about it. It comes back so profoundly. And so I just wanted to sort of explain a little about that.
So the silence, as you notice this evening, no silence is at the heart of each prayer. So around 7 minutes of silence 3 times a day. It's frightening for people who come for the first time. You know, they wonder what's going on. What am I supposed to be thinking about? And what are the others thinking about? And then as the week progresses, it becomes the favorite part for most people. Most people will say that. It's my favorite. But they love the songs, but they love the silence. They love the silence. And so they look forward to the silence. So in addition to that, the silence in the prayer, you can choose to spend the entire week or a few days in silence at Taizé. So if you're spending the whole week, there's a special place where young men stay, another place for the young women. There's a special Bible introduction, more geared to spending time in silence. There's the possibility to be accompanied personally in that silence, so speaking with one of the sisters. There are 4 communities of sisters that work with us at Taizé, or speak with one of the brothers. So that's a little bit in the spirit of the Ignatian retreats. You know, you have these retreats where you try to discern a little bit what God is saying to you, and we don't use a method really for that, but Ignatius had some great insight into how we should read gospel texts and imagine them, giving a great place to imagination, you know, imagining Christ being born in Bethlehem and drawing consequences from that for one's own life, and knowing the temptations we undergo, knowing what it can be encouraging or consoling. And so how many people choose that? Not a big crowd, not so in my day when I was doing the welcome for people wanting to go in silence, for young men going in silence, I sometimes had 80 would want to do that in a week, 50, 60, 70, 80, sometimes up to 100 in the very big weeks. That's not the case anymore. You might get 20, 30 young men doing that. You might get as many young women. So we opened up a possibility to end the week in silence, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because we realized it's a little bit too much overwhelming for some people to think of spending a whole week in silence. So they can get a taste of the silence, and they're surprised how fast the day goes by. If you have the 3 prayers, you have the Bible introduction, you have 1 talk a day. If you're meeting with a sister or a brother, you go for a long walk, you go for 2 long walks, the day's over. No? And so they're no longer afraid of the silence. They start to realize. So it helps them. But yes, it is something very powerful. And I kind of think that it's going to come back. And I think we live lives now where sometimes it's so hectic, so many devices, which are wonderful sometimes, but they take away our inner silence. And I think in the future, I wouldn't be surprised that the number of people choosing silence increases as a reaction. So we have our problems, and we secrete the solutions sometimes to those problems. No, we react to them, and so I'm quite confident that will happen. Oh, I would say just one thing. We've been talking a little bit sometimes, and I had to do that in Washington. I was a lot with the United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. The initial invitation to come this year they were the first to invite. And at Wesley Seminary, they were doing a course on spiritual disciplines. And so they were talking about fasting and simplicity of life. And so they said, could you come and take the class for 2 hours? And I felt, I have to give a different framework for this. No? And I remembered you have a poet in this country called Wendell Berry, no? Who's mentioned, maybe you've heard this line many times before, we have to practice resurrection. We have to practice resurrection. And really the spiritual disciplines are about that, no? Learning to live as a risen person, no? Learning to live as... The early monks were called that sometimes. When the early monks were not bitter old men, they were called a risen one. Un ressuscité, a risen one, someone who is risen, someone really living the life of resurrection. And so today I think often, and that's why I wanted to add this, I think often that the spiritual discipline is not so much fasting, but it's doing less. No? Doing less. No? I'm going to turn off the computer for an hour. I'm going to go for a walk. Be in silence for an hour. Not silence as a punishment. Huh? Silence as a refreshing one's soul, going into nature for an hour, or 2 hours, or a morning, or an afternoon, or a weekend. So I think those are things that could be spiritual disciplines for today, doing less.
day 1 of my 10-day silent retreat, I am shocked at how many times I reach for my phone, and it is off. So, any other questions?
When you mentioned that the young people come at the end of October, and the brothers are around in the area, what kind of things do the young people come and talk to you about? And have their questions and comments changed much over time?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I feel I always learn a lot about young people at that period of the year because they're 16, so it's a new generation. Right? It's a new generation. And so I'll just give you an example. One year, the question was that I got 3 or 4 evenings in a row. How do I know if I'm a believer? How will I know if I'm a believer? Right? And it's a fascinating question, because it means I have all kinds of unresolved questions. I have all kinds of doubts. Am I a non-believer because I have questions? Huh? And they're waiting almost for someone to say, you can have questions and be a believer. No? You can be a believer and still have questions. You can have doubts and still be a believer. No? And they need sometimes just a very simple conversation to realize that something has started in my life. There is a life of faith. Of course, we all need to grow. No, we all need to grow, but something has started. And I think often our ministry to young people is a ministry of confirmation, of believing in them, trusting in them. The way we express trust in them is often to give them responsibility at Taizé. So they're responsible for making breakfast for 2,000 people. Huh? So you have to light the fire, the big pot with boils the water. You have to do that, or you clean up. Yeah. Yeah. And so people realize people trust in me, and that's what makes someone grow. No, is when you feel that someone trusts you, because if you're alone, you see only the doubts and only what is not perfect. No? We had that wonderful reading tonight. No. You shall be perfect as your Father is perfect. No? And the tense of the verb is not the imperative. It sounds that way when in the translation, no, be perfect. But the tense is an indicative, so it's you shall be perfect. It's a promise that Jesus makes. No? It's a promise. No, it's not proning this impossible perfectionism that is stifling. No, but it's a promise. Something will grow in your life.
All right, 9:36. I think I'm going to call it. Thank you guys all so much for being there. And just thank you for Brother Emile.